The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, see everything we do. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Plein Air and Fine Art Connoisseur magazine. We got a special treat for you today because it's a brand new video, never before seen. I think you're going to enjoy this one.
Hi, Brenda Swenson here, and I'm really excited to have you be joining me for my video on negative painting. This is a technique that I became very familiar with about 25 years ago, and what was the biggest challenge was being able to see shapes, being able to see the lights in these paintings, and I realized I wasn't the only person struggling. So over the years, I've developed a technique that shows dark, beautiful, luminous colors that carve out white, glowing lights in your painting. So I'm really excited to show you how I do this. So let's get started, and I'm going to show you my materials. Let's talk about the tools and materials we're going to need for negative painting. This is my Pikes palette, totally filled with pigments, not dry. You want moist colors. 2 bowls of water so I can, clean my brush and have another one for clean washes to paint with. Spray bottle to help move my paint, and a sponge. The reason for the sponge is that when I am rinsing off my brush, I will hit my brush on the sponge. So I go from here, hit the sponge before I come into my pigment. The reason that I do that, if I go directly from the water into my palette, I'm going to over wet my colors, and you just won't have enough saturation of a color. So I'll be hitting the sponge a lot. Next is a 2B mechanical pencil, a kneadable eraser, which I will use to lift up extra graphite, so you're going to want to see how I use that. My brushes are a range of natural hair and synthetics. So I've got synthetics on this side, and all over here is synthetics too. The natural hair works real well for when I need big washes and lots of color to carry quite a bit further, so I'm not having to go back into my palette repeatedly. These are my big wash brushes, and when we come over to these little brushes, I use them for lifting, and I will do quite a bit of lifting throughout my painting. Majority will be at the end, but I've heard people say before, you lift when you've made a mistake, and that's not the way I think of it. Lifting is a technique, and I'm going to show you how we soften edges with a stiff brush. Now we're ready to dive into color. And color is a fascinating and sometimes confusing subject for a lot of people. So what I've created is what I call my color Bible. And as colors come into my studio, I always make a swatch, and the swatch is on a 2x2 piece square of watercolor paper. I use the same watercolor paper 140 that I would be painting on when I do these swatches. And I want to show you that there's a black line across here, and the reason that I have a black line is that it will show me whether or not a pigment is opaque. You need to know if a pigment's opaque with transparent watercolors. So these swatches help me tremendously. So this is cobalt blue. You can see that I put the name, I put the manufacturer, and I put the index code. And I'm going to talk to you more about that index code in just a minute. So when we put a little bit of color onto this 2 by 2 inch square, we want it to be the consistency that we'd normally be painting with when we're glazing, because negative painting is about glazing and transparency. So there I've made a swatch, and I'm using a 1/2 inch brush, and I'm pulling the colors all the way down and over. Now I've created a little swatch that later on I can put in my book as a reference information. So when we look at color, what we have to know is the index code. Right away, Quin Gold. Quin Gold is a color that everybody is in love with. It's transparent, it's golden colors, it's wonderful for glazing, great for mixing. But did you know that Quin Gold is not the same from one manufacturer to the next, nor is French ultramarine or burnt sienna? What I want you to understand is when you hear a name like burnt sienna, that is just called the common name. It's not really telling you what is in a tube of paint. And I'm going to give you an example. So right here, I have a tube, the original tube of quinacridone gold, and Daniel Smith was the first manufacturer that came up with this. You look at the color, and it's P. Every color will start with a P. That means pigment. O means orange. If a color has R, it's red. W, white. So you gotta remember to look at these letters: P, pigment, and then the next letter, which is O. 49. It's called Quin Gold, but look at this is Quin Gold, Quin Gold, Quin Gold, Quin Gold. But you'll notice that each one of them are actually made from a different combination. These might look pretty similar to you, but I want to show you why you're going to have to watch. When I go back here, here's a color that's called quinacridone gold. And I'm going to pull out this green because I want you to see this green too. This is called quinacridone gold. It is definitely not like any of these colors here. But when I look down at this number, P049, guess what? There's P049, but also there's PG7. And look at this, Viridian hue is PG7. So if you mix these two colors, you would have come up with a green. So now, looking at those index codes, I know right away if that's going to be a green color or more of an orange like over here. So instead of always following the common name, burnt sienna, French ultramarine, learn to read the index codes. Now something else I want to show you in here. Color fascinates me. I guess it's the one area I really get to feel like a geek, okay? So if you take a color right here where you've got yellow ochre is P, pigment, Y, yellow, 43. Next one, French ochre, PY 43. Raw sienna, PY 43. Now wait, they all have the same number, but they definitely have a different common name. But look over here, Italian deep ochre. It's got the same number, doesn't it? Same index code, often called color code, either one. It's the same number, but it definitely is a red. Can you see how red that looks? Even though it does have a Y in it, the reason that it's red, when natural pigments such as ochre or burnt sienna are superheated, they change color, okay? That is why that's a red. There's a story that I love, and it's about, back in the 1980s, when Pompeii and Herculaneum were discovered underneath all the ash from Mount Vesuvius in Italy. When they discovered these cities and they unearthed the remains, they noticed that most of the walls were a very deep red. And it became fashionable in Italy to paint the interior of your homes this bright red. Well, not too bright, but it is a reddish ochre. But what they found out a little bit later on was that it was actually a much lighter yellow, but because of the superheated ash, it changed to this darker pigment. So I think there's the history in pigments that I really love, but these books, I have learned more about color. I find as being an artist that I learn visually. I struggle with reading about color and retaining that knowledge. That is why I've created these books. Chances are, if you're visual like me, you also struggle with being able to understand, well, is this more of a warm red or is this more of a cool red? But as I put these books together, it's very easy for me to look at these pages side by side and tell what is a warm and what is a cool. I learn better visually. I can move these around. So if you struggle with color, I think these books will help you. One thing that's really important is whenever you look at a tube of paint, if it has a W, you'll know right away that it has white, and it will be either semi or fully opaque. So once you start to learn to read those tubes, you won't waste as much money buying the same pigment over and over, because you will notice that through here, look at this, I've got 4 that are all the same index code. They all look the same because they are the same color. They're different names, but they are the same color. Same down here with magenta. You'll save money, you'll save time, and you'll have a better understanding of color. Also, remember this swatch of cobalt blue that I put down? I've waited for it to dry. Reason being, can you see the second pass? Right here, almost all of my colors, you'll see a second pass that I put on top once it had dried. Why do I do that? What I have found is that some pigments, in just a nice thin transparent glaze, they almost all look transparent. But my paintings are built up with multiple layers, and I find the second or third pass, I will learn more about the characteristics of that paint and whether or not it's going to go towards an opaque. So before I put that pigment away that was on my palette here, I'm mixing up a little more, and then I'm going to put that line right down and let it dry. And that will show me more about that pigment. Watercolor is uniquely different from other mediums. One of the things that I love about it is that pigments can be granulating, staining, transparent, opaque, and some pigments might even be 3 of those put together. So the characteristics when you do a negative painting, especially transparent and opaque, are 2 of the most important things you need to be aware of. You might think, well, if I thin it down enough, it's going to be transparent. Maybe in the initial wash. But after the first pass, you're going to have to stay away from anything that is opaque. Why? Because your colors will turn muddy very quickly. I'm going to show you some examples of what I'm talking about. Now, I also want to say a little something more about opaques. I don't want people to think that I'm against opaque paints. I'm not. I use them in other techniques, and I use them when I'm sketching. What we're talking about is negative painting. We need the glowing, transparent colors that will make our whites just luminescent in our paintings. Once you put an opaque over that white, you'll lose it completely. And I'm going to show you some examples of pigments that are opaque and transparent. So right here is cadmium yellow. If it is a cad, it's opaque. Don't even have to think about it twice. It's opaque. Next color here, cad red light. Once again, cads, we know it's going to be opaque. And then this cobalt Turquoise Light is also an opaque. I just looked at the index code. It doesn't have white in it, but it can still be opaque. So I'm going to show you some examples up on top of this line. I'm going to pull these pigments and tubes out of the way, and let me get a rag for my hand. And I'm going to show how an opaque color will look across this black line. The black lines that I put down are done with a black Sharpie marker, okay? Some people use India ink, and I don't always find that it works, and it might even start to lift. With the Sharpie, let it set up for about 10 minutes. If you don't, the paint will just resist on top of the line. Put it down, let it dry, and then you can see through these samples, not only here, but in my earlier little swatches. The line had dried 10 minutes before I put pigment on top. So I'm going to take the cad yellow and I'm going to put it right on top of this line. So look at how the pigment is sitting on there. It's looking a little bit chalky, isn't it? Okay, now I'm going to take the cad red light, and I need to thin it down so it's an honest comparison of thickness of pigment to water, the ratio of how it's suspended on the paper. Going to put it down again and look at how that is sitting. Okay. Next color is going to be the Cobalt Turquoise Light. And put a nice little swatch right down that line. Boy, that really looks chalky. Any pigment that looks chalky or milky, that's telling you whether or not it's opaque. Since I know there's a lot of opaque pigment in my water, I'm going to switch over and use a cleaner bowl of water now. Down here I have Nickel Azo Yellow. Why did I choose that color? Well, the reason I did is that I want to show if you love a color and it's opaque, chances are you're going to be able to find a transparent that is close enough that you can still have that mixing color you love that you want to mix on the surface of the paper or on your palette. Find a substitute that will work, and often you might have to do 4 or 5 passes with different pigments just to find the one you like the most. So next I'm going to put this down and go over the line. Now it will start to dry. Let me put even a little more pigment down. So I'm having a nice fair comparison between the two. We're going to let that set up. Next color is Anthraquinoid Scarlet. You get bonus points if you can say that 3 times fast. It's not easy to say. So I'm going to put this on top of the line and watch what happens. Pick up a little bit of the extra pigment on the bottom so it doesn't creep back into itself. Okay, and the third color is going to be the Manganese Blue Hue. When you hear the term hue, a lot of people think that hue means that it's an inferior paint. It's not. What hue means is that it looks like and acts like, but isn't actually that true pigment anymore. Here we have Manganese Blue Hue. Manganese was known to cause lung cancer with the miners that were mining it, so it became outlawed to mine it anymore. So, hence the name Manganese Blue Hue. It looks like and acts like manganese, but is no longer a health risk to the artists using it or to the people who are mining it. So we're letting these dry. They need a moment to set up. And now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to show you this glaze, okay? I've put down French ultramarine blue on both sides. They're put down ahead of time because in glazing, the first pass, the second pass, the third pass, They all have to be bone dry before you can put another glaze over it. So pre-painted and drying now. So I'm going to show you the same order again. Now I'm going back to the opaques once again. And I'm going to put the opaque on top and see how it's acting. Got to give it a couple minutes to set up. I'm going to use my opaque water bowl here. Trying to keep the same consistency each time I put paint down. Okay, let that set up and dry. And back over to the blue, no, the cobalt turquoise light. And I'm going to put that across the line. A little more. Now when you glaze, you don't want to scrub the surface. You'll probably notice that I'm just floating the brush across. If you do this type of motion, you're just going to lift up any underlying pigment. So soft brush gently going over the surface. Now I'm going to put down the transparent colors. So I've already contaminated that one, so I'm going to have to get some more fresh out of the well. But right here, just going to grab the Still Clean Nickel Azo, or Azo. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right or wrong. I'm going to put it across this line, and I want you to look at what happened there instantly. Look at that beautiful green that came out of the yellow and the blue. We're not getting that on the opaque side, are we? Right here, transparent, love the secondary colors. Since this pigment is dirty, now I'm going to go over and just get some clean pigment, pull it out to the side, and glaze over this line and watch the secondary color that happens. It's beautiful purple that's coming underneath. And the final one is the manganese blue hue. And coming across the line here, not a big change, huh? Blue on blue, you're not going to see that much of a difference, but you will see transparency. So these are starting to dry up on this line. Can you see, if I can point this out with the back of my brush, look at how white that surface is, clearly and opaque. This one, even though it doesn't look white, there's enough blocking of the line that is going to tell me it will block colors. And same idea happening here. This isn't completely dried yet, but when it does, you won't see any of what's happening. Watercolor is one of those interesting things. As it's drying, the surface is changing. What might look opaque will become transparent once it's fully dried, just like this one here and right here. Let's look down at what happens when we glaze with an opaque. You can see a little bit of color through there, can't you? But is it as luminescent as over here? Not even close. Look at what happened here. That almost turned kind of a muddy tone, where I'm getting this secondary beautiful purple underneath here. And again, blue on blue, you won't see that much of a change happening. But here I can see more of an interesting, almost green coming through. The manganese blue does push towards the yellow, so now I get to see a little bit of a green. So I'm hoping that this will help you understand why opaques don't work for negative painting. Not that they're a bad pigment, but know their strengths. Because as we start to build a painting and we want to go really towards the beautiful darks, that's where opaques are going to get you into the most trouble. Negative painting requires that we start to see differently. When you look down at this image, I want you to see the leaves are painted positive. I didn't paint anything in the background, only the leaves. On this side, I painted everything around. When you think of the term negative painting, I have people often ask, can't you find a better name than negative? I think that puts a few people off. But if you come from the era that I do, we used to always get these little strips of negatives whenever we got photos developed. And when you looked at that image, you actually saw the dark was the light was the dark. And that is what I think of when I say negative painting. Also keep in mind that quite often when people paint, if they have a tree, they're painting the tree directly, same way as I painted the leaf directly down here. Negative painting, I would be painting around that shape to release it. So you would see it because I painted around into the negative space. If you think of a carver, or let's say a sculptor is a better term, you have a sculptor that adds to. If you have clay, you're adding onto the form to create it. But if you are a sculptor, you're carving away. So there's two ways to get where we want to. Some people paint positive, some people paint negative. Both of them are a wonderful and valid way of painting, but it requires that we see a little bit differently. So let me show you a couple examples. When you look at the leaves on this black background, right now, they're not too terribly exciting, are they? So if we put them all and space them out, we can see the space around, but it really doesn't mean very much, does it? Once we take these leaves and we start to overlap them, and they need to touch. So touching is an overlapping, and I start thinking of the design a little bit differently, start moving it out, start creating. So when we put the mat over it, you'll see the negative shapes completely different. So I put it here and I bring it down. What I want you to look at now, make that a little bit more interesting design, look at this space. Look at how big and interesting this space is here. Look at that space now. Look at how interesting this shape is, that shape, and that shape. Negative painting. This is how we start to see negative shapes around things. We're touching to the edge and we're focusing on the shapes between them. Okay, so let me put this aside next. With this exercise, we're just going to use two colors, Payne's gray and a yellow. Why two colors? The idea of negative painting can seem very complex, and once you add additional colors into that combination, it will get more and more complicated. So starting with two colors can really simplify the learning process. So looking down here, I'm looking at grays. I want you to take a look at, I've put down Payne's Gray, which was made by the company Core, and here's Payne's Gray by American Journey. And here we've got Payne's Gray by Holbein. Now don't worry about this combination right now. The yellows are the same in each one of these squares, but I want you to notice how different the greens look when these two come together. Why is that? That's that index code I talk about all the time. So this Payne's Gray has red, blue, a secondary blue, and a black. Has 4 colors in it, okay? And then I'm mixing it with Hansa Yellow Medium, Nickel Azo Yellow, Quin Gold, and Permanent Yellow Deep. So each one of these is a combination to see of the varieties that I can achieve. Now what you'll notice is look over here at this color. This is Payne's Gray by Core, and I was rather surprised because my grays turned very flat. I didn't get really a beautiful secondary color of green when I put Payne's Gray and yellow together. It became kind of muddy. I don't know what was going on. Some pigments will want to interact, some will literally push away, some will even just go flat. That is why I do these combinations here. So looking at the most interesting, it was either this one or that one, and I ended up deciding I liked this combination, which was a Payne's Gray by Holbein and Quinacridone Gold. I want to show you a few examples of how different gray and yellow can look together. These are the exercises that we're going to be doing, but this is to show the Payne's gray and the yellow, the variety, the wonderful variety and the complex shapes that we get to develop. See the leaves here? There's only about 5 in the initial drawing, which I'll show you in just a minute. But each one is slightly different. This one became more muted. And so it just gives you a little chance to see how much difference there can be in a color that's called a common name, Payne's gray, and the variation in colors that you can get. Above here you can see the original leaves that I showed just a minute ago on the black surface, and I'd laid them down here on the paper. Remember, we want to have interlocking and overlapping shapes. So I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just a total of 6. So we don't want to overdraw the background or we won't have an opportunity to build shapes around it. So starting with 6, and then what I want to do is using a pencil, I'm going to link these shapes together so they're not just floating individually. Remember when we put the mat on earlier? I want you to take a look at that again. So if I put a mat on here right now, and I want you to take a look. Look at this interesting shape that's right here. Look at how big the shape is there and over here. You want shape and size variety in the corners. You don't want the corners to be extremely interesting because that's not where we want the eye to go. Once I have my design drawn, then I'm going to draw, I call this a format line. And I do want to have the leaves go out of the format anywhere between 2 and 4 times. Why? Well, it's just part of this exercise. It's teaching you to design to the edges of the page, which is really important with negative painting because you have to have contained spaces to paint into. If the line came all the way out here, you wouldn't see that as a closed-in shape. It wouldn't be a closed negative shape. So we want to make sure we do that. Okay, so look at these interesting shapes. Something that I spoke about a little bit earlier is about using a kneaded eraser. What I often see happen is that we get too much graphite on the paper, and as you come down and you start to put just clean water in the beginning, it can actually start to lift up a lot of the graphite. So to avoid having that problem, I love these things. And return to like we were a kid, and we have to roll it so it becomes more smooth on its edges. And once I have a nice gummy worm, then I roll it over the drawing. The neat thing, look at how light that is. What happens is if you use a hard eraser and you go like that, and then you're just getting the schnitzels everywhere, you're smudging more of the graphite. So don't do that. Use a kneaded eraser, and if the lines are too dark, then you just roll over it, and you can just pick up the extra. I have a tendency to draw very dark. I kind of like line drawings. I like seeing the maker's hands in my painting when I'm done. When I look at paintings by others that I admire, I like seeing the drawing in there. But I know that not everybody feels the same way. So if you want to get rid of it, here's a good way to just lighten your pencil lines. The thing is if you take all the pencil off, you're not going to have any drawing left. So don't go too far. And I see another line here I need to add in. And I like that shape in there. Hi, I'm Brenda Swenson, and welcome to my video. In this video, you will learn how to create exciting underpaintings, carving out lights, building interesting shapes into your backgrounds, and one thing especially important, paint characteristics. What's unique about my video is you will come away with a greater understanding about color, color mixtures, and how to create glowing, rich darks that make your whites luminescent. This video will be a perfect fit for you if you have a general understanding of watercolor, but now you're ready to really dive into a deeper understanding of how to develop rich, dark, complex passages of color and shapes. I believe that enthusiasm is contagious. I've had more people come alongside me, and through watching me sketch and paint, it's as if watercolor has become, I don't want to say this in the wrong way, but it's kind of become my mission in life, to share this joy with others, to have them experience what I've learned. Join me if you love watercolor and you're excited about creating paintings that express color and light. I think you'll have a wonderful time.
You can learn more about the new release, the full video, at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount code for you today only, and it's in the comments section. Now let's get right to our interview.
My art journey began when I was very young, probably about 8 years old. I knew many of my friends loved to dance or sing or play instruments, but none of those things really interested me. But I knew when I picked up a pencil, something different happened inside me. I knew that I was able to express how I felt about my world in a little bit different way. And I remember when I was about 10 years old, I saw a billboard on the freeway that said, "Go to school to be a professional artist." And I didn't think that you could really be a professional. I thought it was just something you did for fun in your coloring books or in your bedroom, you just drew. And all of a sudden I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to be. Like many people, I had somebody that told me I wasn't good enough. So I kind of allowed that person to determine my dream for me. So I buried my hopes of wanting to be a painter and just kind of went about my life. I went to school, got married, and raised my kids. But it wasn't until I met somebody very special that my husband saw that spirit inside me and encouraged me to start taking classes at a local community college. And my fear of finding out that I wasn't good enough was pretty strong. And he knew how hard that was for me. And so here I was going to a community college, and what did he do? He took me out and bought me all new clothes to go to school with. He knew how much this meant to me. I was probably the most overdressed kid going to school in that year. But through that, I knew that somebody else had confidence in me, and that created confidence in myself. I exhausted all the courses I could through the community college, and I was lucky because I met a group of people that belonged to an art association. Once I met them, I found out that there was this whole world of watercolor that I didn't know anything about. Living in the area that I do in Southern California, there's a lot of very large associations. It was within a few years that I was involved with the National Watercolor Society and was the exhibition director, and also Watercolor West in charge of programs. So right away I was put right in the middle of a very strong and diverse family of painters. And I think the location that I was in really helped develop my skills and put me on a little bit faster track in learning. When I would describe the way that I paint and my style, I think you can always see that light and shadows are always a main character in my work. When I was about 8 years old, a girlfriend of mine had a little triangular prism that belonged in a professional camera. And when I looked through that prism, the entire world changed and all of the colors became illuminated in a different way. And it was from that point forward that I started to look at light differently. And it's been the driving force in my work. What I think that is unique about me as a watercolor instructor is that in school, teachers taught to people one way. And I always knew that I didn't learn like everybody else. I am much more of a visual learner. That has helped me to be a better teacher. The way that I teach is that I say it, I demo it, and I give a handout. And I figured out of one of those 3 ways of learning, I'm going to be able to reach a way that somebody will be able to absorb and apply new information that I teach. And I also bring to it more of a tender heart. I remember what it felt like to feel inadequate and not smart enough. And it wasn't that I wasn't smart. That's not a problem for me. But what it was is that I retained information quite differently. One of my greatest strengths is the way that I interpret light, color, and shadow in my paintings, and how I can take a dark passage and illuminate it instead of being dull, but fill it with life and color. It's interesting, as we develop as painters, sometimes we think that we have a weakness that's holding us back. But what I have found is that when I have an area that I find is weak, that becomes an area that I just dive into and I study and I work on. And I think through feeling like I had a weakness, I have developed a greater understanding of how light changes, how forms, how would I say, that the way that light reveals form, color, and texture, that I allow it to become the main subject in my paintings. I've gone from thinking that if I can just make it look like something, it will be good enough. What I've come to realize is that a painting is built on many, many, many elements. I like to think of it as a whole body. If you take the skeleton, I think of a painting as being, starting with the bone structures. Drawing and design is the skeletal frame. Value is the muscular form that holds it together, and color is the skin. Color is the part that's the beauty. So out of these 3 elements, I've learned to create a whole that creates a stronger and better painting. I am an observer of life. I live in an area where I get to go outside. Weather is pretty nice all year round in California, and I'm an avid walker. Most mornings I'll walk anywhere from 3 to 5 miles. And what I do is I observe light. I observe how it changes the world around me. And sometimes I'll take a sketchbook and I sit and I study from life what is happening. And it's through being an observer of what is really happening and not really just looking at photos, but observing reality. I think that really has become my strength. I'm not drawn to just one subject, but I am drawn to all subjects. It is how light affects subjects that determine if I'm going to paint it. I've been known for painting old abandoned trucks, and lately I've been doing portraiture that have gone on to international shows, and I love to paint on location, and I travel all over the world, and I usually paint in Europe about 3 weeks a year. So I don't think I can really be pigeonholed. I love to paint, and I love to paint light and life and things that are happening around me. When I paint, I experience my world. What I found out was that as soon as I drew and painted a subject, I saw it for the first time. What I didn't know was that before then, I was just walking by things and I wasn't really studying it. Now I find when I sit down and I draw a building or I draw a person, it's as if the memory of that is burnt into a permanent place in my mind. And once I do that, I can pull that up and almost draw it from memory anytime. So it's being aware of the world around me, responding to the world and drawing it that has completed my life and enriched me in greater ways than I thought was imaginable. I stay inspired by being around other artists, by feeding off of each other, seeing how we can paint on a plein air location together and they will take the same subject that I'm looking at and interpret it differently. I go to shows. I try to look at what's new and exciting happening in the world. I try to read, but more than anything, I think what inspires me is spending time with a pencil, a pen, and a brush and paint, and just tackling new and different subject matter all the time, not doing the same thing, not getting in a rut, changing up the surface. What I think is the biggest challenge for most painters is to stay inspired and to inspire themselves. It's not up to the world to inspire me. That is my job. And so I do spend a tremendous amount of time trying to interpret the same subject matter with different materials, different light, different surfaces. I'm always trying to ask myself, what if? What if I did something differently? How could I make this new and exciting? I believe that enthusiasm is contagious. I've had more people come alongside me, and through watching me sketch and paint, it's as if watercolor has become, I don't want to say this in the wrong way, but it's kind of become my mission in life, to share this joy with others, to have them experience what I've learned. So I inspire, I encourage, and I hope more than anything that I give people the tools, the knowledge, and the information that they can then do what I've come to know and enjoy in my life. So I think encouragement, inspiration, and permission to paint the things that resonate in their heart and enjoy the world in a whole new way.
What an inspiration she is. You can learn more about the full-length video at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount code in the comments section for you today only. Also, what else do we have for you? Well, we have a free video. It's 2 hours in length, $100 value, and you can get it. It's called 97 Amazing Painting Secrets from the World's Best Artists. Lots and lots of painting secrets and tips. And you can find it for free at 97tips.com. Hey, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'm Eric Rhodes.
Hi, I'm Brenda Swenson, and welcome to my video. In this video, you will learn how to create exciting underpaintings, carving out lights, building interesting shapes into your backgrounds, and one thing especially important, paint characteristics. What's unique about my video is you will come away with a greater understanding about color, color mixtures, and how to create glowing, rich darks that make your whites luminescent. This video will be a perfect fit for you if you have a general understanding of watercolor, but now you're ready to really dive into a deeper understanding of how to develop rich, dark, complex passages of color and shapes. I believe that enthusiasm is contagious. I've had more people come alongside me, and through watching me sketch and paint, it's as if watercolor has become, I don't want to say this in the wrong way, but it's kind of become my mission in life to share this joy with others, to have them experience what I've learned. Join me if you love watercolor and you're excited about creating paintings that express color and light. I think you'll have a wonderful time.